If you have a Bible, do have Luke chapter 14 open, because we're going to look at this. And one of the things you'll notice right at the start is it's another dinner party that Jesus is attending. In the Gospels, he goes to lots and lots of dinner parties, and more or less every single time, he's the guest that in hindsight everyone wishes they'd never asked, because he makes everyone feel uncomfortable. Which is quite ironic. It's quite ironic, really, that when they do those lists of who you would like to invite to your ideal dinner party, whilst he's not top of the list, Jesus quite often figures on the list of people that they would like to invite to their dream dinner party. So, for instance, he appeared on the spoof TV radio presenter Alan Partridge's list. Alan Partridge would love Jesus at one of his dinner parties, along with the entire Thatcher family. Why he would want that, I have no idea. But normally, when it's not a comedy character, if someone picks Jesus, they normally pick someone like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens to be at the same party, so that they could watch the interaction between someone who believes there is no God and someone who believes he is God. They want to be a fly on the wall and watch that conversation. But like I say, when you look at the banquets that Jesus is invited to in the Bible, aside from the one where he turns water into wine and keeps the party going, he makes everyone feel awkward, every single time, more or less. He makes the hosts, he makes the guests, he makes them all uncomfortable. And so as we look at Luke chapter 14, he should make us feel uncomfortable too. That's one of the things that reading this passage should do for us. If you don't feel slightly uncomfortable by what Jesus is about, what we're about to look at as to what Jesus says, if you don't feel slightly uncomfortable, you've not heard him properly. If it doesn't make you uncomfortable, you've not heard him. Because what Jesus is going to do at this dinner party that he's at is he's going to challenge people's priorities. He's going to take the excuse about not following Jesus later, or only following him so far, or saying that you've got other priorities in life and you just can't follow Jesus. He's going to take that and say, I've got to be your highest priority in life. I've got to be the most important thing to you. I've got to be above your family. I've got to be above your work. I've got to be above your religion. I've got to be above your hobbies. I've got to be above absolutely everything. And then, and only then, when Jesus is in that top spot, does he say, that's when life works. So this morning, we're going to be looking at the excuse that we might make to do with following Jesus, that we might say every now and again, I've just got other priorities right now. Jesus is important, but he's maybe second, third, or fourth on my list. And we're going to have to reduce that down to actually admitting that when we add, I've got right now on the end of the line, I've got other priorities, it's not really true. It's really true to say we've got other priorities. And Jesus is going to speak to us, and he's going to humble us, and hopefully he's going to change us. So let's look at the passage together, and we're going to start in a strange place, because if you noticed, at the start of the banquet, there's this little incident that happens where Jesus heals a man who's suffering from an abnormal swelling of the body. In some older translations, it was called dropsy, or in modern medical terminology, it's edema. It's when the body fills up with fluid and becomes bloated. This guy is suffering from it, and Jesus heals him. It's a disease which damages your organs. It's not nice. It causes the sufferers to have a thirst which just cannot be quenched. They want to drink all of the time, which just adds to the problem of their bloating and the water retention. And Jesus heals this man and sends him on his way. And to start off with, it looks like it doesn't have anything to do with what follows. It looks like there's a guy there who's sick, Jesus heals him, sends him on his way, and then he makes everyone feel uncomfortable at the party. Actually, I think it might be the lens we're meant to view everything else through. So we're meant to see this man and see him as a metaphor for everything else that is about to go on. Why do I say this? Well, we have to understand how people viewed this disease in the time of Jesus. Because quite often they associated an illness that you had with a character trait that was present in you as well. They almost thought like the disease was a moral judgment on how you were. And this particular illness, people viewed it in a certain way. They thought they assumed it was the consequence of being a gluttonous person. So it was often used as a metaphor for greed and for lust and never being satisfied with what you've got and always wanting more money and a better position in life. If someone had it, there would be an assumption that they just want more and more and more. The thirst that cannot be quenched was that people would say, that's just what they're like. They always want more. And it's as if Jesus right at the start is saying, the things that you live for, which you think are going to quench you and are going to satisfy you, they're never going to. But only I can heal you of that unquenchable thirst. And so everything he then says to the people at the party, everything he says to the guy who's thrown the party, it's all to say, you've got an unquenchable thirst for stuff and for power and for money, and you've got to change those priorities completely. It's almost like it's the metaphor to view everything else through. So, let's look at it. Let's go to verse 7. What Jesus does to start with, he's got this plan to make everyone feel uncomfortable, but he's going to start with the guests. So, in verse 7, we see that the first thing he does is he notices that something is going on in this party, that everyone is trying to get the best seats to sit in, the places of honour, it says. And again, in their world, where you sat at a meal indicated your level of importance. So where you were seated was how important you were. So a bit like a wedding, the people on the top table, they are the important people. People on table number 1, they're probably more important than those on table number 2. And if you're on table number 9 or 10, you know you're just there because they were making up the numbers at the end. It was that kind of world that they lived in. Where you sat at the meal indicated how important you were. And the people in the best seats were the important people, the influential people, the rich people. So if you could get yourself in and around those people, they're going to help you get on in life. You can talk to them, that you can further your career, you can make a few business deals. Banquets were used as an opportunity to climb the social ladder. In fact, people would often find out who the guest list was before deciding to go. And if the guest list was not deemed good enough to further their life, the invitation would get declined. That's how their world worked. And if you went along to this meal and you found yourself sitting among the less honoured people, well, you'd be disappointed. You'd be thinking, why am I sitting with these people? They can't do me any good. They can't increase my standing. So this party is a bit like the playground at school, where the kind of social hierarchy develops and you know who the popular kids are and you know who the goth kids are. And everyone's jostling for position so that they know where they fit in the world that they live in. And you know what? Adult life is just an extension of that most of the time. If you get around the right people, they can raise you up. Other people can be irrelevant. They can't do you any good. So why would you want to socialise with them? Why would you want them in your life? What Jesus says is this. He says, when you walk in, take the least honoured position. Look for the worst seat and go and pick it. And he says it, and it kind of comes across as a bit of a pragmatic reason to start with, but he says that if you do that, the host will come in, he'll spot you sitting where you shouldn't be, and he'll ask you to move up to a more honoured position. That'd be a good moment. If you're sitting in the worst spot and the host comes in and says, hey, you need to be sitting over here, and then in front of everyone, you can go and walk in front. Whereas, if you sit in the most important place to start with, and the host comes in and you're not supposed to be sitting there, he'll point at you and say, hey, that's not your seat, and the only one left will be the worst spot. So it looks like a bit of a pragmatic reason to start with, but it's not just pragmatic advice. Jesus is saying here, stop seeing people as a means to an end. Change your priorities. If you have a thirst for position and getting on in life and it consumes you, you will never follow me as you should. That's what he's saying. And so in verse 11 he says, For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. When he says that, it's not just earthly wisdom. He's saying, stop having the priority of getting yourself forward and pushing yourself forward in life. Instead, let God raise you up. Let him promote you. Now, what does that look like? What does that look like? Is Jesus saying, don't have any big ambition, don't try the best that you can be, don't try and get on in your career? No, he's not saying that at all. He's saying, go for it. He's just saying, don't jostle for position, even if others do. So if in your workplace an opportunity for promotion comes up and you have a rival for the post, don't poison their chances. Don't have a little snidey conversation behind people's back, which you know will get back to the right people and damage their chances. Jesus is saying, don't see people as a means to an end. So don't ignore the person who empties your bin. If you've got a cleaner in your office that you work in, don't ignore them. Talk to them. He's saying give the homeless person as much value as you would the Queen. Don't just not make eye contact and speed on past them. He's saying stop being the person whose value and significance and worth is found in your position in life. Because if that's your priority, it will be an unquenchable thirst. You will never be satisfied, and you will ignore people around you that you should not ignore. Instead, he says, humble yourself. Treat everyone as you would want to be treated, and let God reward you. And if he does reward you, if you do get to the top in your workplace, great, enjoy it. If you don't, if you miss out on a promotion, you won't be destroyed by it, because you know you're not living for those things. He's saying to all the guests, and he's saying to us, if your position in life is something that consumes you, you will never be satisfied. Never, ever, ever. And so after making the guests all feel uncomfortable, and maybe one or two of us, he then turns to the host. Because in verse 12, we can see, he then says, then Jesus said to the host, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives or your rich neighbours. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you'll be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Now, what's Jesus doing here? Is he saying that you can never, ever, ever socialise with family, friends, and people of wealth, but every single time you have to go looking for the poor and the lame and the crippled? Is he saying that at Christmas time, when the mother-in-law is angling for an invite to Christmas dinner, you can legitimately say, I'd love to have you round for Christmas dinner, but unfortunately Jesus tells me not to do that? Is he doing that? Unfortunately, no, he's not saying that. He's saying something a little bit similar to what he says in verse 26 and 27. So if you look down there, he's saying, in those verses he says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. He doesn't literally mean we're supposed to hate our family. He means that your devotion to him has got to be so consuming that compared to it, your devotion to your family looks like hate. It's not hate, but it's really saying your devotion to Jesus has to be that high, that if it ever comes to a choice between your friends, your family, or Jesus, you should choose him. He's saying that being a follower of Jesus should be the most important thing, and that should make you love people more. And the key thing he's saying to the host of the party is this. It's the word repaid. Repaid. So just like people at the party were all jostling for position so they could get on in life, the host threw the party so he could get on in life. He did it, and he invited the rich people so they could repay him in the future. He would spend a ton of cash putting on this big lavish do. He would invite the right people in, and in time the party would pay for itself because of the contacts that he'd make. He'd be able to do deals, he'd be able to climb the ladder. When he wanted something, he'd be able to go to some of those people and say, you know that great party that I invited you to? Can you help me out with this? That's how their world worked. The person is throwing the party because it benefits them. That's why they do it. So when Jesus says, change your guest list, he's saying the same thing really. Don't have the wrong priorities in life. Use your time and use your money for God first. Use it for God first. And getting on in life second. If someone in the time of Jesus threw a party and invited the people that Jesus suggests he should invite, they gained nothing out of it. It was money down the drain. It didn't increase their standing in society. It didn't do them any good. It would have been viewed as an utter waste of money because they can't repay you. Now, we might not think we're like that, but maybe we are. Maybe we are. There's an old story about a farmer who has a cow, and he discovers at some point in the recent past his cow has wandered into another farmer's field and has come back pregnant. And rather than seeing her as some kind of bovine floozy, he's overjoyed about the fact that he has a pregnant cow because the cow's going to have a calf. When the calf's born, he can fatten it up for a bit and then he can sell it and he can have the money. He's absolutely overjoyed that his cow has loose morals and will sleep with any old bull. Where am I going with this? And the cow, the pregnancy goes well. And at the birth, the farmer is even more overjoyed with the result. His cow has had twins. He's had double the blessing. And he tells his wife, you know what? We're going to raise both of these cows. We're going to fatten them both up. And because we've been blessed so much, we'll sell them both. And we'll keep half the money for ourselves, but we'll give half to the Lord. We'll give half to God. Well, that extra cow, we'll give all that money to God. Time goes by, the calves grow bigger and bigger until one day the farmer comes in to see his wife, and this time his face is downcast. She asks him what the matter is, and the answer comes back. The Lord's calf died. And you know what? It's always the Lord's calf that dies. It's not the one we're keeping for ourselves. It's the Lord's calf. So when Jesus tells this host, be sacrificial with your time, don't do things that just benefit you. Don't just use your money for your enjoyment and for yourself. He's saying to him and to us, pour your life out for other people. Be sacrificial. Go the extra mile. Do things for people when it's of no benefit to you whatsoever. What he says to the guy who threw that party, he says to us as well. And so the question comes across time to us. How are we spending our time and how are we spending our money? When it comes to your bank balance, do you work out everything that you have to pay out to start with? And then when you look at it, you say, oh no, the Lord's calf has died. I can't do anything for God. Or do you start off by saying, Jesus asks for sacrificial generosity, and so I'm going to start there. So it's him first. Do you say to yourself, I won't have as good a holiday so I can give to God's work? Do you say, my new car doesn't need all the new features so I can sponsor a child somewhere in the world? Do you say, I don't need that new pair of shoes so that you can support a person in need? Or is it for you first? When it comes to your time, what are your priorities? Are you sacrificial with your time? Are there points in your week where you say, you know what, I'd really much rather spend this time on me, but I'm going to commit it to some kind of ministry? Do you do that? Do you say, you know what, I don't fancy small group tonight, but those people need me, so I'm going to go? Are there moments where you draw alongside someone and it costs you, but you do it because it's the right thing to do? Or does it work more like this? I'd love to be a part of your ministry, but I'd have to miss Love Island, and I just can't do that. I've got too much going on at work right now to be involved in any kind of ministry and to serve God. Here's a challenge for you. Think of your diary for the week ahead and ask yourself this question. Where is the time that I've sacrificed for Jesus? Look at the week ahead and say, where is the time that I've sacrificed for Jesus? Now, don't be too ruthless with yourself, because I know sometimes we can do that. If you have elderly parents you have to look after, that's time used for Jesus. If you have children that you have to look after, that's time used for Jesus. But look at it and say, where's the time that I've sacrificed? Where's the time that I've sacrificed? And if you can't find any, then you're a bit like the guy in the healing at the beginning. You're like the bloated guy. And if that's you, you need to change your priorities. You need to sacrifice for Jesus. You need to do things for him. And if it feels like you're missing out, you won't miss out. Because if you notice what Jesus says, he says that if you are sacrificial with your time, he says you'll be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So God does pay you back. Jesus will reward you. When he returns, he will reward you for the things that you do. That might take a bit of a leap, but it's what God says. And lastly, we're going to look at the last thing that Jesus does at the party to make people uncomfortable. The last thing where he wants them to change their priorities. And this can heal us, actually. If you think of yourself and you think, you know what, I'm a bit obsessed with my own life and I'm a bit obsessed with my own money and doing everything for myself. This last bit is how you get healed by it. So what you notice is that the party has not gone well. The guests are uncomfortable, the host is uncomfortable, and in verse 15, one guest tries to smooth things over. So having noticed that Jesus has just spoken about the resurrection, he says, "Blessed is the one who will eat at the feast in the kingdom of God." So it's almost like he's trying to get everything smoothed over. But then Jesus tells a story about a huge, expensive, lavish banquet. This story is the guy who's putting it on is putting on this huge feast. And he's sent out all of his invites to all the people that he wants to come along. And then on the day of the feast, he sends his messenger to them and says, everything's ready, come now. Everything's ready, come now. And the people who are invited have other priorities. So one says, I can't come, I've just bought a field, so my business is more important to me. Another says, I've bought a load of oxen and I need to test them. So essentially, he's bought himself a new car and he wants to go and test drive it. The last one is probably even more crass. I've just got married and procreating is my priority right now. That's the tone of what that one is. And so the guy holding the feast gets mad. Everyone has just insulted him. And his banquet can't wait. There's no refrigerators to chuck the food in. So he says, go and find me the poor and the blind and the crippled and the lame. Fill my party with people who can never, ever repay me. The servant does it. And he comes back and says, there's still room. There's still room. There's still food. There's still drink. So the master says, go out then to the country lanes and the roads and find people and compel them. Do you notice that? Compel them to come to my party. Now, we look at country roads and we probably think farmer. That's probably what we think. In the time of Jesus, the people who lived out on the roads were the thieves and the robbers and the prostitutes. And the servant is being told, go to them and compel them to come. Convince them that the guy throwing the party wants them to be there. Do anything to get them there. And when they bring up their objections as to how they can never repay the host and they don't deserve to be there, tell them he wants you there. Compel them to come. The master in that story is a picture of God. He invites people to come. But if their priorities are all wrong and they're obsessed about their work and their new car and their family and their money, if they reject his invite, he's going to be mad at them. But then he says, everyone who's going to be there doesn't deserve to be there. They can never repay him. And that's us. That's us. We're the people out on the country roads that are compelled into God's party. And when you see that, all of a sudden, everything that he said before starts to make sense. Because into every single room that Jesus walked, he was the most important person in the room, every single time. And the advice that he gives of taking the lowest place, he did that for you. He did it in life, but he ultimately did it by going to the cross. He went to the lowest place he could possibly go. When he says, be sacrificial with your time and your resources, he can say that because he was sacrificial with his time and his resources to the extent that he will, again, go to a cross for us. And he invites us to the banquet. He's the master inviting us to his banquet. And he's saying, you do not deserve to be there, but I want you there. I want you there. You can do nothing to repay me. So treat people the way I've treated you. And that is what we're supposed to do. So when Jesus says, take the lowest place, when he says be sacrificial, we're not supposed to do it because we're religiously obeying him. We're doing it because we're inspired by the fact that he's done it for us. And so, just want to finish with the challenge of verses 26 and 27. And the only way you can do this is by looking at the cross. Because Jesus says there, if anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. He's saying there, he's got to be the greatest priority in your life. And you can only make him the greatest priority in your life if you see what he's done for you at the cross. He took the lowest place and he sacrificed himself so you could go to a party that you don't deserve to go to. That is why we should do everything else that he says. So take that away with you. Pray about it. Look at your diary. Look for the time to sacrifice. Think about the people in your workplace, how you treat them. But put Jesus first. Put him first. Let's pray. Jesus, we want to thank you that when you came to this world, you didn't take the most important seat, but you took the lowest spot. You humbled yourself in coming, and you humbled yourself to the extent that you would be prepared to die in our place. We thank you that you were so sacrificial with your time and your resources that you would literally lay your life down for us. We thank you that you invite us to a party that we don't deserve to go to. And we would ask that your example would not merely be an example for us, but it would be the thing that inspires us and empowers us to do what you say. So we don't exalt ourselves because you didn't exalt yourself. We sacrifice our time and our resources because you sacrificed your time and your resources. And we try to compel people to come into your banquet and to trust in you because we know what you've done for us. We can never repay you, and yet you invite us to the greatest party there will ever be. We ask that if our priorities are wrong, if we're bloated up like the guy at the beginning who's that living metaphor for living for self, we ask that you'd heal us and you'd make us more like yourself. Help us, Lord, we pray. And we ask this in your name. Amen.